This is Joel Moses. I am the president of the Photographic Historical Society of New England, and I thank you for the opportunity to be able to welcome all of you here. I'm going to deviate just a little bit from my usual introduction to recognize a PHSNE member who passed away recently. Henry Weisenberger was a retired aeronautical engineer, a member of several Boston photographic societies, including a charter life member of PHSNE, where he served as a president on several occasions. Henry was a giant in the Boston photography scene. He loved landscapes, seascapes, snowscapes, and he was highly skilled and very generous with his knowledge of photography. Henry's knowledge will be missed. He passed away unexpectedly at the age of 96 years old. I will now turn over to Dana, the presentation, and just remind those of you who aren't members yet, if you would like to stop by our website, www.phsne.org, you will have an opportunity to sign up if you so choose. Dana, it's all yours.
Thanks, Joel. Hi, I'm Dana G. I'm the program coordinator for PHSNE. And before I introduce our speaker, Ned Quist, I just have a few announcements. You may have seen when you signed on that the active screen is being recorded and the presentation will be available later on YouTube. And if you use the chat window, which is at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a window pop up. And if you could address, put any questions that you want to ask Ned in there during the presentation, and I'll relay those to him at the end. Also, we'll have a little more informal chat at the very end of things. And at the top right is a speaker view. You can toggle between speaker and gallery, and speaker view is best for this presentation until we move to the end where we have questions. Okay, so Ned Quist is a retired academic librarian, having served at the Johns Hopkins University's Peabody Institute as the music librarian for 25 years and 15 years at Brown University, where he was music librarian and associate university librarian for research and outreach services. Since retiring, he's developed a deep interest in the culture and creativity of the Shakers. Quist makes furniture in both the Shaker and the arts and crafts styles, and he's currently working on a giant picture frame, he tells me, and a giant dining room table. And I will now pass the presentation along to Ned Quist.
Thank you, Dana. Before I start, let me start by saying that I'm not a photographic historian, so I'm hoping that at the end of this presentation, I'll find out what the mistakes I made in terms of photographic history. I'm also a beginner at Shaker studies, so let's hang in there and see how this goes. I will also say to begin with that you're going to hear me say the word Harvard a lot. Please understand this refers to the town in the northeast corner of Worcester County and not that great university in Cambridge. There we go. Can everyone hear me and everyone see what I'm doing? Good, okay. So, 30 miles northwest of Boston, in the northeast corner of the town of Harvard, the Shakers established one of their earliest communities. They chose a spot that Mother Ann Lee, the founder of the Shakers, had used as her headquarters during her 1780s missionary journey from Watervliet, New York to New England. Lee and her followers purchased the Square House in Harvard. The Square House became the cornerstone of what would be the Harvard Shaker community. The Harvard Shakers reached their peak population sometime between 1825 and 1849, when they may have had as many as 188 members living in 4 families: the Church family, the North family, the South family, and the East family, all situated on about 2,500 acres in the towns of Harvard, Ayer, and Littleton. The Shaker community came into gospel order, that is, they began their existence in 1791, and they lasted until about till 1918, when the Shaker Central Ministry, the mother church, if you will, in New Lebanon, New York, sold the remaining Shaker property with all of its buildings to Boston industrialist Fisk Warren. My interest in the Harvard Shakers grew out of my research on the Shaker sawmill on Bennett's Brook in Ayer, Massachusetts. On the advice of Robin Campbell, I visited the Ayer Library in the fall of 2019 looking for more materials. What I found was not at all what I expected. There in the Nutting Historical Room were a stack of photo albums and over 2,000 glass negatives. These included views of Ayer, Harvard, Groton, Shirley, and other surrounding towns taken by a group of amateur photographers in the late 1880s to about 1920. Only a small number were of the Shakers, but among these were several that I believed were little known and added considerably to our understanding of the Harvard Shaker community. Together with better known photographs at the Trustees of Reservations Archives and the Harvard Historical Society, there exists a remarkable body of late 19th and early 20th century photos of the Shaker community at Harvard. Amateur photographers in the Ayer and Harvard area, and more like them throughout the country, were taking advantage of the new gelatin dry plate technology and the handheld camera to photograph their neighborhoods. The 1890s through 1920 saw a blossoming of amateur photography in America. In 1888, the Boston Camera Club had started documenting the fast disappearing colonial and early 19th century structures of Boston. These amateur photos of the 1890s and early 1900s were by no means the earliest photos of this community, so I'll begin with a brief historical survey of the images of the Harvard community. This ambrotype, taken about 1860, is believed to be among the earliest, if not the earliest, architectural photo taken of any Shaker village. It shows the Harvard South family, and if you look between the 2 trees in the middle of the image, you'll see buildings in the distance, which are in fact the Harvard Church family buildings. Many of these buildings no longer stand. From 1851 till about 1880, most photographers, including some amateurs, created their own photographic plates by the collodion process, a stressful and complex process which had to be accomplished in a few minutes before the applied chemicals dried. This is one of the earliest known photos of the Church family buildings, and this print is from about 1866. Take note of the 4 buildings that are in a row along Shaker Road, which is the road running diagonally through the middle of your screen. And you'll note that 2 of the 4 have gambrel, or if you will, Dutch-style roofs. Keep an eye on those. We're going to see these buildings several times, and those roofs will change over time. And we can not only date the photographs that way, but also trace the architectural changes in the village. The Shakers kept relatively detailed accounts of their activities, both religious and temporal, in diaries and journals, many of which survive. These often help us to date these photos. For example, on August 23rd of 1871, Olive Chandler wrote in her journal, "The family about 1 o'clock repaired to the office to have the Boston artist take a picture of the family group. The artist returns to Boston on the evening train." And this stereo view, in fact, shows that very moment when the family is gathered in front of the office building. From that same photo shoot in 1871, this stereo view shows those same 4 buildings I showed you in the first picture of the Church family. And note now, only one of them has a gambrel roof, and the other 3 are all gable end roofs. A major development in photographic technology in the 1870s was the gelatin dry plate. As Sarah Greenough observes, the practice of the professional photographer who made their living selling cabinet cards, carte de visite, or stereographs of landscapes was severely shaken during the last 2 decades of the 19th century. Improvements in the gelatin dry plate process, the introduction of small handheld cameras, and the advent of a photo finishing industry during the 1880s changed photography from a messy and complicated process to one so simple that even a child could master its technique. And so here we enter the scene, if you will, of the crime. To set the scene for the entry of our amateur photographers who I've characterized as suspects here, note the location of the 2 remaining Shaker families to the town of Ayer in 1893. This is a USGS quadrant from 1893, and you'll note that the Church family and the South family, which were both still in existence at that time, are less than a mile actually from the town of Ayer. You can walk that in probably about a half hour or less. The library staff at Ayer brought to my attention that these amateur photographers knew one another, and in some cases took photographs together on photo outings. All were amateurs. All but one appeared to have belonged to the same local Masonic lodge. And there is evidence that they shared images and or negatives, complicating the issue of who took which image. So I decided to find out more about these amateurs and explore their photos of the Shaker communities. William Wright is probably the best known of these amateurs. Photos from his collection in the Fruitlands collection, now at the Trustees, have appeared in several publications, including Michael Volmar's Harvard, which is one of those Images of America series, Edward Horgan's The Shaker Holy Land, and Pearson and Neal's The Shaker Image. Other collections of his prints exist at the Ayer Public Library and of his glass lantern slides at the Groton Historical Society. Wright also used these lantern slides to give illustrated lectures on the history of Ayer. Inheritor of his father's undertaking business, Wright's obituary claims that he was the most prominent undertaker in the Ayer area and was also known as a furniture maker and for his hobby as a photographer and collector of photographic images. In its obituary, the Fitchburg Sentinel noted, Mr. Wright made a valuable collection of early scenes and people of Ayer. On at least one occasion, Wright provided undertaking services to the Shakers. In 1894, embalming and preparing for burial the body of Lizzie Palmer, the Shakers' cook. Shaker sister Maria Foster writes in her journal of March 10, 1894, Marcia and her girls prepare Lizzie for burial. Wright and son embalm her and put her in the casket. I couldn't resist not including this picture, which has nothing to do with the Shakers, but it's Wright and his family on a picnic along the Nashua River in about 1900. And you'll notice in his right hand, he has a string, which I presume is attached to the shutter of the camera, which is taking this picture, sort of an early version of the selfie. Charles Kennison comes from a more humble background than the other amateurs. He was born in Temple, Maine, and with his family moved around several Massachusetts towns because his father was associated with a portable sawmill. From the age of 12, Kennison was wheelchair-bound, the result of a spinal deformity. Never having attended either public or private schools, nor apprenticing to any trade, he was a self-taught mechanic, learning to fix clocks, bicycles, and other mechanical devices. At the age of 13, he set up shop in a small annex to the family home in Ayer, which is still standing, and you see it there in that little insert in the upper right. It's off the railroad tracks on East Main Street, where he learned photography is unknown, but as the camera was in those days a purely mechanical device, it's not difficult to speculate how he might have been asked to fix one and became curious about how to use it. In 1907, Kennison purchased a small automobile, which he called his buckboard. And on Sundays, he motored around much of northeastern Massachusetts, taking pictures. In his diary on deposit at the Ayer Library, it details many of these photographic outings. Before obtaining his buckboard, and even afterward, his photographic excursions relied largely on the generosity of friends, With their larger automobiles came group outings and the opportunities to take pictures in more different types of weather. In his obituary, appearing in Turner's Public Spirit, it was noted that he was an amateur photographer of more than ordinary ability, a severe critic of his own efforts, and artistically and mechanically, his work was far above average. Kennison's relationship with the Shakers was through his brother, John Lawrence Kennison, the publisher of the Ayer News. Married to Louise A. Preble, the daughter of Sanford Preble, Sanford Preble was a longtime employee of the Shakers, who leased the Shaker Mill on Bennett's Brook in 1895. And here I'm going to dip into my mill research a little bit to show you a photo of that mill. And in front, the three fellows you see standing there are, in fact, the three Preble brothers, with Sanford being the one in the foreground with his left hand on a pile of lumber. Harrison Evans is the next of my suspects. I don't really have a picture of him, but what I do have is this very fuzzy picture taken by Charles Kennison of Harrison Evans taking a picture of William Wright, a sort of wonderful mixture and playful use of photography at this point. So you can see all three of them are out on an excursion taking pictures. And of course, they love nothing better than taking pictures of each other. This is another shot taken by Evans, and this is of Kennison in his wheelchair inside what they call a Dago hut. Now, I don't know what a Dago hut means. I looked it up and I couldn't find out. I'm assuming it's some kind of hunting blind, but maybe one of you can tell me later what it really is. In any case, this is one of the shots we have by Evans. This is one by Charles Hassam. Again, I have no picture of Hassam himself, but I do have him taking a picture here of Charles Kennison, again, sitting in his wheelchair, taking a picture. And that little blob in the lower right, I take to be the rear end of a cow. Hassam, by the way, was a local dairy distributor, and he also had a connection with the Shakers. In her journal of October 15th, 1903, Sister Annie Walker reports, "I have a ride in an automobile. Enjoy it very much through the kindness of Mr. Hassam." Our final suspect was a surprise to me. Jim Ludke and I met one day to go through the records of the Boston Camera Club to see if any of my amateurs were members. I was trying to find out if the photographic documentation being done by these amateurs could be connected to the work of the Boston Camera Club in documenting the historic buildings of Boston. We were looking for Wright, Kennison, Evans, or Hassam. We found none of them as members. Instead, we found a prominent member of both the Boston social scene and a person who would build a mansion in Harvard and establish the Fruitlands Museum, Miss Clara Endicott Sears. So let's put her in the dock. Clara Endicott Sears has had a profound and possibly underappreciated influence on Shaker studies. She's often recognized as one of the earliest collectors of Shaker material culture. She rescued one of the oldest surviving buildings in the Shaker Village, the original trustee's office of 1794. She purchased it in 1920 from Fisk Warren and had it moved to her estate on Prospect Hill in Harvard. It later became her Shaker Museum as part of her Fruitlands and Wayside Museums. A prolific author, Sears wrote in 1916 Gleanings from Old Shaker Journals, which not exactly a classic in the research field, but it includes a summary history of the Shakers and the Harvard Society, and includes a collection of excerpts from the many Shaker diaries and journals which she collected, and significantly 40 photos and illustrations. Her skill as a photographer remains among her lesser-known aspects of her multi-talented life. According to her biographer, Cynthia Barton, Sears gained her photographic interest from her father, Nivet Sears, who studied photography at the Paris studio of Gustave Le Gray. She became accomplished enough in photography to win national prizes from the Photography Association of America for her landscape photography in 1888, 1890, and 1891. Significantly, the winning of these prizes also suggests that she was proficient in the darkroom, as the rules for these prizes required that the photographer take, develop, and mount their own work. And I thank Jim Ludke for pointing these out to me. He found them in his assiduous searching of Google Books. These two photographs I'm going to show you were found in the Sears papers at the trustees with captions in Sears's hand. They were taken by her in the late 1880s, which is likely her most active period as a photographer. Although the subjects of the photos line up with Sears's later interest in New England traditional culture, they may relate more to places with which she was familiar. Pepperell is the next town north of Groton, of course, where she summered at their Riverdale farm estate until 1906. Beverly is the next town north of Salem, where her mother's ancestral family, the Peabodys, family home is located, and where she spent considerable time in her childhood. And by the way, I had to giggle at Dana's introduction. While Peabody is the same Peabody you see up here, down in Baltimore, they pronounce it Peabody. I had to learn how to repronounce that when I moved up here. So after I saw her name listed as a member of the Boston Camera Club, I had some circumstantial evidence for her role as a photographer of the Shakers. But the first documentary evidence for Sears as a photographer came from this type list of photos in the Fruitlands Museum, found in the papers of Bayard Underwood, a local architect and preservation specialist. It had never occurred to me that Sears might have been the photographer of some of the photos in gleanings from old Shaker journals. This list by itself is hardly conclusive because it's not clear if Underwood or some staff member of the museum made this list. Although I just talked yesterday with Underwood's daughter, and I'm now more convinced that Underwood himself actually made this list. Pardon me. The only other evidence I have of Clara's being the photographer of these photos are Underwood's comments in the data sheets accompanying the Historic American Building Survey photographs. You should check those out if you're interested in the Harvard Shaker Village. They're wonderful. Among the other names that appear on this list is the professional photographer Leon Dadman, who with his brother Frank had a professional photography business in West Somerville and Boston in the late 1880s and early 1890s. We'll come back to him a bit later. And here I have to credit Ron Polito for me being able to find out who this guy was. Now I'll turn to the Shaker pictures, and we'll have a look at their village taken by these amateurs and maybe some others as yet unidentified. So we know William Wright not only took pictures of historic buildings, but took pictures of other pictures, especially earlier photographs, ambrotypes, daguerreotypes, tintypes, or maybe even printed from collodion negatives, making photographs of the originals. This view shows Groton Junction, which would become Ayer in 1871, in about 1855. The Shakers were regular and frequent visitors here. After the arrival of the railroad in 1844, they visited Groton Junction to drop off and pick up passengers from the train station and to ship their products of their many industries to Boston, New York, and other locations via the railroad. Maria Foster's journal from the 1890s records trips to Ayer that were almost daily occurrences, with not only trips to pick up passengers, but also to visit the doctor, the dentist, shopping, or even getting one's portrait done in a local photography studio. This rather well-known group photo, taken in front of the church family's trustee's office in 1895, was probably taken by William Wright, and so far is the only Wright picture of the Shakers themselves. It's been widely published. It's interesting to note that none of the older sisters appear to be looking at the camera, and there's a reason for that. It's a Shaker thing that goes back to the 1870s, which I can explain later if you'd like. This picture, published in Gleanings and in the Shaker Image, and as a postcard, is very well known. According to the type list in the Underwood papers, it was taken by Miss Sears. The type list dates the image from December 3rd, 1916. While it could have been taken in 1916, clearly not in December, not with all those leaves on the trees. Since the sisters appear to be in motion, the picture probably was taken with a relatively short exposure, What gives me pause about the attribution to Sears is the writing appearing in white in the upper right-hand corner. Take note of the shape of the R in both the word Shakers and the word Harvard. We'll see this handwriting again and discuss a bit how it got there. These pictures add considerably to our understanding of the built environment in the last years of the Shakers, in some cases by providing different angles of buildings known from other images, or in others, providing the only clear evidence of the existence of the building, its location and potential use. The rural home, a new dwelling house for Harvard's North family, was built at considerable expense under the supervision of Augustus Grosvenor in 1853. Unlike most images of this building I've seen, this 1896 photo by Charles Kennison shows what appears to be a carriage barn and shops attached to the main building by a not atypical Shaker bridge. In his illustrated book, Harvard, Michael Volmar opines that this is the only known photo of the East family buildings. Not anymore. Charles Kennison's 1915 photo of his brother John Kennison, John's wife Louisa, and their son Lawrence is taken in front of that same East family building. Note that same vine growing up the right front. I'll show you both again. Here's the earlier one and the later one. The vine is quite clearly visible in the upper right of that building. Louisa's family, while working for the Shakers, lived in this house at one time. Back to my favorite topic, the Bennett's Brook Mill. This photo, 1907, taken by Harrison Evans, has become my favorite image. And it's actually, as you can see, two photos joined in the middle. It captures for me the majesty of these slumping, decaying buildings that once hosted so many industries vital to the Harvard Shakers. Despite its obviously deteriorated condition, the sawmill is actually still working under water power in 1907. This photo is what grabbed my interest in the whole project because I had no idea what this building was or where it was. I suspected, since it said it was near Shaker Mill, it was probably in the Shakers North family, but I had no evidence of what it was. Putting together several other photos, I was able to determine at least where it was. In the upper left-hand corner is a photo I took in January of last year, 2020, of the trustee's office, the North family trustee's office, which is the only building still standing from the Shaker North family. In the upper right, you'll see the original L of that building in the foreground and the road curving around to the left. In the lower left, you see an earlier photograph that I was able to find at the Harvard Historical Society, and thank you, Judy Warner, I think you're listening tonight, for supplying this. And you'll note not only the trustee's office, but its original L, and immediately to the right, we can see the gable end of that very same building that is in the lower right. So we know where it was, we still don't know what it was. The following two pictures I include not because they are by any of the amateurs under discussion here, although they might be, but because of the writing on each, which to my eye seems to be the same hand. The Underwood list attribute one of these to Clara Endicott Sears. As you look at these, again, note the slant of the letters, the lowercase r's, which resemble y's, and the D, in this case at the end of Harvard, with a tail pointing off to the left. A clue to another suspect who may have taken these is actually found in that same Underwood list. And here the credit could be Dadman Company of Boston. Looking for other photos on the internet by Dadman, I discovered a number at Boston College, many of which also have these same white legends, but not the same hand. This is the other one, which has that same hand, and you can see it in the middle underneath the barn itself. Artist and journalist Benson Lawson admired the one broad street he found in the Shaker Mother Church village of New Lebanon, which was, as Rob Emlin notes, replicated in other Shaker communities. Indeed, the north and south facing views of Harvard's one broad street, Shaker Road and the Church family, would become among the more popular views taken by many photographers of Harvard's village. This is a Kennison view, almost identical to the postcard view we saw at the very beginning. Here's that postcard view, and here's Kennison's. So if you took maybe 3 steps to the left, you would get this view, which according to what I've read in some publications is dated about 1900, which makes sense, as we know Kennison's was taken, whoops, sorry, I jumped off here, was taken in 1903. In this 1914 view, this is Kennison again, this is also Shaker Road facing north. We see Maple Lane heading off to the left. And then from the back to the front, the Shaker Schoolhouse, the so-called Square House, and the tailor shop. Now this note was taken in 1914. This white hand picture, again, that same hand, supposedly taken about 1916, shows the Square House, but notice the schoolhouse is now gone. We know the schoolhouse got moved to South Shaker Road. I didn't know exactly when, but I'm beginning to think it was between 1914 and 1916. Next, a view looking west on Maple Lane, leading to the Holy Hill of Zion. You can still walk down this, by the way. It still exists, and it's a public walkway. This was the Shakers' outdoor worship space. This shot, also by Kennison, shows Louise Kennison and an unidentified woman, possibly a Shaker's sister. It's worth noting that in all of these views of the Shaker village taken by Kennison were taken while the Shakers were very much still living there and in possession of their property. This is another of the white hand photos, this one looking southwest towards the South family in the distance, and then we see in the very foreground the Church family. Note those 4 buildings, you can sort of barely make them out. There's no longer any no longer any Dutch-style roof. They're all gable-end roofs at this point. This was probably, again, taken around 1916. And then if we go back to that first ambrotype, which was taken from the exact opposite view, we're now looking northeast with the South family in the foreground and the Church family in the background. So what can we learn? What I found most compelling about these photos is they were taken by the Shakers' neighbors for the most part, by an undertaker, a mechanic, a bookkeeper, and possibly a wealthy heiress, perhaps with a few professional photographers thrown in. Also intriguing and not yet completely settled is the relationships these photographers had with the last Harvard Shakers. Kennison certainly had a family connection through his sister-in-law, Louise Preble Kennison. Wright, local undertaker, was known to the Shakers professionally. Evans' only connection seems to be his friendship with Kennison. Of the Shaker journals I've read from this period, only Wright and Hassam make appearances, and we've heard those 2 quotes. Sears, as we know, visited the Shakers often. Here it's worth restating that the actual authorship of a great many of these photos is murky. Wright not only took and developed his own photos, but also borrowed images from other amateurs, as well as collected images of earlier photographs to use in his lantern slide lectures. Wright's meticulous recording of the images he borrowed from his friends is quite clear from the annotations he made on the collection of lantern slides at the Groton Historical Society. The annotations by Kennison on album pages in the Ayer Library, Exposure by Evans or Exposure by Hassam, also suggest that either Wright and or Kennison may have developed photos for their friends or shared their cameras while on photographic expeditions. Both Wright and Kennison numbered their negatives. Wright used them consistently in identifying prints and lantern slides. Kennison's prints were similarly identified numerically. I don't know if this is a widespread practice. Maybe you can all tell me later. It's also not clear if Hassam or other amateurs took photos of the Harvard Shakers. In the 3 collections I've examined so far, and this has been somewhat attenuated by the year-long pandemic that slowed down my research on this, we've seen mainly the photos of Kennison and Wright, and others sprinkled in. We may yet find collections of Hassam and others, and even that white hand photographer. Let's go back to the white hand photographer. He or she supplied at least 2 of the photos in Sears's gleanings. This one, and this is on the lower left, is as it appears in the book, and the upper right is from the negative with that same white hand legend. And then this one, which we've seen earlier, The Last of the Harvard Shakers, and as it appears in the book in the lower right. Did Clara Endicott Sears take photos of the Shakers? I would dearly love to say absolutely she did, because I think that would be news. Circumstantial evidence certainly suggests she could have. She had the motive, illustrations for her book, Gleanings, the means. She was an accomplished photographer with the financial means to have all the equipment and supplies she could ever want. When her mother died in the early teens, she inherited $6 million, which was a lot of money then too. And the opportunity. She was a frequent visitor to the Shaker village in Harvard and evidently a welcome guest among the remaining Shaker sisters. Other than the somewhat sketchy evidence of the type Fruitland's list found in the Underwood papers, I can't point to a smoking gun yet. Sears's diary from 1916, the year in which many of the white hand photos appear to be taken, does not mention photography. Using some of the images and gleanings along with the Fruitland's list, we can make some sort of tentative attributions to some of these photos. Again, not knowing who the white hand is, but we do have a pretty clear idea of which 2 were taken by Dadman. A number of the images we have from this period are labeled on the negatives themselves in this distinctive hand. If the Underwood list is correct, these all date from around 1916. 2 of them were used by Sears in gleanings, but not all of them made the cut. Some became postcards and were possibly sold in the Fruitland's gift shop. The similarity of writings suggests they were all taken, or at least labeled, by the same person. They may well have been taken by a professional photographer, and among the plausible candidates, of course, is our friend Leon Dadman. While none of the photos Underwood credits to Dadman have the white hand labels, we know that Dadman used this practice in the photos that are at the Boston College Library. Now we can actually look at what these things look like on the slide, the negative itself. I thank Christian Goodwillie at Hamilton College for providing these photos for me. Writing backwards on the emulsion side was a relatively common practice in this period, evidently. And in these slides, you can see that in this case, a red ink was used, which when viewed from the glass slide appears black. You can barely make it out in the bottom here, sort of against the, you can see the reflection of the iPhone and the photographer's head there, but the writing is black there. But then, of course, a negative, when printed, it comes out white. Amateur photographers like Wright, Kennison, Evans, and Sears were neighbors of the Shakers, and in the case of Sears, a very dear friend. In this 1980s to 1918 photographic legacy of the Harvard community, with its at times murky provenance, still makes it possible for us to see the built environment as the Harvard Shakers saw it. In particular, we get a glimpse of the physical condition of their community before its sale in 1918 to Fisk Warren. Many of the buildings would be lost subsequent to the Shakers' sale to Warren. A major fire claimed the Herb House, First House, and Sisters Shop in 1919. A second fire claimed the Great Barn, the second Great Barn, in 1937, and several buildings were moved. The old office, of course, became the Shaker Museum at the Fruitlands Museum in 1922. The schoolhouse was moved to a site opposite the Shaker burial ground on South Shaker Road, where it subsequently burned, I think, sometime in the 1960s. The South Family Privy became part of the Hancock Shaker Village in 1990. The rural home was demolished in the 1930s. What remained of the East family buildings were demolished and sold with the extension of Route 2 in 1950. Despite local architect Bayard Underwood's efforts to save it, the South family's stone barn roof collapsed and the barn fell into ruin in the 1970s. And if you go there today, that's what you'll see, is just a sketchy foundation, not even this much. Around the same time, the South family brick shop was demolished. By no means the only photos of the Harvard Shaker community in its final years, this body of photographic evidence perhaps holds a special place in that it was created through the eyes of the Shakers' neighbors, with whom they had family, personal, or business connections. When we consider that in the last 30 years of the Harvard Shakers' existence, there were only a few Shakers left to document the life of the community, and of those, only 2 or 3 wrote down anything of substance. These photos supplement that meager written record with a visual narrative. It is especially true of the North family, for which we have virtually no written records. In all, they give a flawed but valuable view of the Harvard Shaker village and some of its inhabitants during its final years.
Thank you, Ned. Ned has his email address up on the slide so that if we don't get to all the questions tonight, you can contact him with questions of your own. And if you would all like to unmute, we can give Ned a round of applause.
Well done, Ned. Thank you.
Great job.
Visuals were outstanding.
I've got to run, but very interesting. Thank you very much, Ned.
Thanks, Bill.
Okay. I'm going to read some of the questions put into chat to Ned, and I saw that Meredith mentioned that she's from the Shirley Historical Society and can share information about the Shakers as well. So maybe we'll do Ned's questions first, and then maybe Meredith, you can join us for a few. So let's start with these. Just okay. This is a question from Ben, actually. So why would the Shaker sisters look away from the camera in the photograph that you mentioned that about?
So in the 1870s, there was actually a sort of an edict that came out from the central ministry in New Lebanon that told the Shakers basically to get rid of all of their photographs. So a lot of photography was destroyed or burned or simply given away or whatever, partially because it was a drain on their financial resources, because photographs were expensive. I mean, I think a stereograph, for example, might have cost anywhere from $1.50 to $3, which is a lot of money in the late 19th century. The other thing was that there was a matter of, the word I want is humbleness. The Shakers didn't want to seem too outgoing and friendly to the world by looking at the camera. And I think that's what that's all about. I actually have an article somewhere, and if somebody wants to send me an email address, I can give you the citation. It's actually from a strange place. It's from a Journal of New Mexican Art or something or other. There's a whole issue on Shaker photography. So
when was that edict again?
1871, I think.
1871. Okay, wow. The question I had that you just answered was, what would they keep photographs of themselves?
They did in later years, for sure.
In later years, okay.
Yeah, because I mean, these rules came out, but they weren't always followed religiously. If you get a chance to meet the Shakers who are still around up in Maine, Brother Arnold Had will tell you that Shakers' rules were more often followed in the breach than they were in practice. So even though they may have said to do this, and a lot of people probably followed it, in the later years, they hung portraits on their walls, they exchanged photographs, because remember, a lot of these people had never seen one another except in photographs, because they may not have been able to all travel. The ministry traveled constantly, but if you were a rank and file member of the church, you may not be given permission to go to South Union, Kentucky, or to Watervliet, New York.
Great. I want to ask Meredith about this. Several people asked, where does the name Shakers come from?
Okay, so the Shakers did evolve from the Quakers. They're not Quakers, but they have many similar beliefs. They're pacifists. um, the the reason and someone said, why did they drift away? There aren't many anymore. There are 3 now living in Maine. They believe in a communal life, which means you've got to be able to get along with everybody, but they're also celibate. So that means they're not giving birth to children who will be raised in the Shaker faith. Even though they would adopt children, families would join and families would leave, and it's a hard life. In their worship, they were very energetic, and they would shake, and they would whirl around, and it was quite different from the Puritans of the day, who would just sit solidly in their pews.
Let me ask Ned a question. Ned, is that what you understood when you were researching them?
Well, yeah, this is all common knowledge. What Meredith said is absolutely true.
Right. So would anyone have photographed them during their services, or I'm assuming that would have been not permitted?
As far as I know, there's only one photograph ever taken inside a Shaker service, and Meredith can correct me if she knows better, but it was taken of the Sabbath Day Lake Shakers in the early 20th century.
Okay.
I know there are sketches.
Yes.
And Miss Sears, I just went to grab my copy of Gleanings from Old Shaker Journals, and she had sketches that people would make of the dancing and so forth. And my opinion on the photo of the women walking, they were in the middle of walking across the street, probably from their dwelling to the meeting house, and they were concentrating on where they were walking. They did not turn to go, oh, wait, there's the paparazzi. You know, they just kept walking.
Great. Thank you, Meredith. And let's see. Tom Keegan commented that as far as them keeping photographs of themselves, in 1978, I had the pleasure of assisting in a study at the Canterbury Shaker Village in Canterbury, New Hampshire, and the 3 surviving Shaker sisters at that time had many photographs of the village and its former residents in their files and archives. And that village is now a museum, and those images are reserved or preserved there. Ned, can you talk about the various Shaker museums that may have photographs?
Well, certainly Canterbury does. They have a wonderful archive there, and they have digitized all of their photographs. The same is true of the library at the Sabbath Day Lake community in New Gloucester, Maine. And let's see, other places where they're, well, of course, Hancock. And there's the Shaker Museum and Library in Old Chatham, which is now moving to East Chatham, I think. They're getting a new building. And they have a wonderful collection of photographs. And of course, locally, as I've already mentioned, the Harvard Historical Society has a wonderful collection of photographs, including many Shaker photographs.
When you mentioned the glass negatives at the Ayer Library, how were they making those accessible? Would you ask permission to see them?
No, those have all been digitized.
Oh, they're digitized, okay.
Yes. I would say they've been digitized at reasonable quality, but as like that one picture of Evans taking a picture of Wright being taken by Kennison, that was very poor quality. I suspect it could be done better. Those were done at 300 DPI, and I think they could probably do a better job on some of those. They were just done from the negatives. They just reversed the negatives. So,
with the portrait of Kennison with his camera,
yeah.
Do we know who took that one? Was it one
He
of the
did.
other?
It was a selfie.
Oh, it was a self-portrait. Sorry. I'm
Did
going
it with
to
a
ask.
mirror.
Got it. Sorry. So I'm going to ask our PHSNE membership then, what camera is that? Does anybody know? Does anyone need to see it again? Okay, this is just a totally PHSNE moment here. If you show us the slide again, Ned,
I got to get
maybe
there.
we'll see if someone can ID the camera. That's a great photograph. Sorry.
Yeah, he actually took several of those.
Okay. There looks like there's some markings around the lens, but I'm not an expert in cameras from this period, so
Dana,
anybody?
based on the handle on the top, it looks a lot like that one that Vladimir showed us that goes a wheel. It's like the Kodak compact camera. I'm not sure that's it, but until anyone else has a better guess, I see the handle there. That kind of makes me think of it.
That one was Kodak cartridge number 4, but this one looks bigger than that.
Well, this is something that I'm sure we
It,
can.
sorry,
No, go ahead.
it does look like a Kodak, I think, because of this frame.
The format looks like it's a large format or medium format, Vlad.
Yeah, it's a large format.
Okay.
I have something like that in my collection, and it dates back to approximately 1899.
Yeah, I would date it.
It looks
days as
identical
well.
to what I have. It was made by a predecessor to the Rochester Optical Company, and the date was 1896 or 1899. The particular company was in business for only a year before it was taken over. But what I have is identical to that.
Great. That's fabulous.
And it was a 4x5, but it was a 4x5 glass plate camera. It was a 4x5 camera.
So he would have been taking, I mean, they all would have been taking around the dry plate glass negatives on their outings, which can be really heavy and hard to transport in quantity.
But that is a 4x5.
So someone, if they all were going together, I imagine maybe they took him in his buckboard and went out to the location they were shooting at. I love that photo of the 3 of them.
Ned, if you're desperate for it, I'll sell it to you. You can match it with the photograph.
My wife would kill me. Starting another hobby.
Wright has a question. The Shakers are known for artisan work, furniture, tools, etc. Did the amateur photographers ever make images of their graceful minimalist products, the Shakers products?
Not until, I would say, the middle of the 20th century. The most famous Shaker photographer that I'm aware of was Brother Delmer Wilson, again in Sabbath Day Lake. He took pictures probably from the 1930s and 40s and 50s even of what was going on in the Shaker village. Although not so much of their products, I don't think they certainly didn't glorify their products the way outsiders did.
When were the museums established? Do you know?
The earliest one is Hancock in about 1960, although Canterbury might be earlier. I'm not sure. Depends upon how you define museum.
And when you were researching Clara Endicott Sears, did she have cameras or any, equipment like that in her estate that you know of?
That's a darn good question. That's one thing I haven't looked at carefully. I'm sure she probably did. I actually have a list of what was in her house in Harvard, but I haven't looked at it for cameras. Or maybe I did and didn't find any. My guess is that if she took those pictures in the early 20th century, she did not hold on to all that equipment.
Let me see if there are any other questions.
I have a quick question. Isn't there a Shaker Village up in Enfield, New Hampshire?
Yes. Museum.
I don't know if we talked about that or not. They still have a number of buildings there.
Yes, they do. Not much of a archival collection. They got a late start on that because like Harvard in a way, it was privatized entirely. The Catholic Church owned that, all those buildings for quite a few years. And then it was sold to a developer who built all these ticky-tacky little houses along the lake. And then finally it became a museum. So they had a late start. I think that probably didn't happen until the 1970s.
I have a question for Meredith. Meredith, my question is I have a recollection of two things, that some of the buildings for the Quaker, that the Shakers had were actually involved or were part of, later sold to the state of Massachusetts, are part of the Shirley House of Correction. Is that true?
The Shirley Shaker community, which was just over the river and up and down a hill from the Harvard community, lasted from 1793 to 1908. It was sold to the state of Massachusetts and used as an industrial school for boys, a reform school, up until the 1970s. Then the reform school boys got older, and it was first a minimum security prison using a lot of the Shaker buildings and using the industrial school buildings. Then they added a medium security prison with, cement blocks, big wire fence. And then just over the line from Shirley, you get into Lancaster, and they built the maximum security facility. So yes, it's there. The Shirley Historical Society, in the years when there's no pandemic, in the fall, we take people on narrated tours of the Shaker buildings, but we have to do it with the full cooperation of the corrections facility, and we go with a guard taking us around.
That was my follow-up question, because I remember like 20, 25 years ago, they used to give tours. And that you just mentioned that they still do it most years, other than probably last year and this year. So thank you. I will try to see if I can get myself on that tour.
Yeah, Meredith, if you want to put a link in chat to the tour information, feel free. Also, someone just asked what the link for the YouTube recording of this will be. We don't have the link yet, but there is a YouTube channel that hosts all of the PHSNE talks that have been recorded. And Ben has put the link to that channel in the chat, which you can click on and see all of the presentations recorded so far. And let me see, do we have, does anyone else have a question they would like to ask?
Dana, I've got a question about the music of the Shakers. Well, I believe it sounds like they have music because they like to shake at church. But I have also seen some churches where they shake and there's no music going on. So I'm curious, were the Shakers known for music? Is that what got them shaking? And is it possible to still find like recordings of people who are performing Shaker music to kind of check it out?
Absolutely. There's a ton of Shaker music. They may have composed something like 10,000 hymns and anthems, most of which were sung a cappella. They didn't use instruments typically until the late part of the 20th century. Then they started adding organs, and at Canterbury, I think there was even a saxophone quartet or something. But generally speaking, the Shakers were singing. I don't know if in the early days of the Shakers, it was attached to the dancing or the movement, if you will. It did become more regimented in that sense that there would be a group of singers in the middle of the hall, and then there would be a set dance that would be done around them. That became a more formalized thing in probably the early 1840s or 30s or something. And then it almost disappeared entirely at the end of the 19th century. So that there's today, while the Shakers still have some movement connected to their singing, it's very minimal.
If I may add to that, the artist, yeah, one of her bits is her singing a Shaker hymn. So it's still pretty much relevant. On a good day, I could tell you the name of that song or the name of the poem, and I can't today. It's pretty easy to research. Enya is E-N-Y-A.
And it does.
Ben, how are we doing for time?
We're doing good. We're right on pace for kind of a few more, maybe any more questions, and then maybe 5 or 10 minutes of just personal conversation. I think we could stay on until about 8:45 or so, and then probably end the meeting for everybody at that time. But I think this is a really good opportunity now that we've all figured out where our mute buttons are. We should come off mute. Everybody be ready to give Ned a huge round of applause, because Ned, that was outstanding work and research on your part. So thank you so much.
And your cat is very handsome. Also, next, I just want to mention that next month, I believe it's May 2nd, first Sunday, we're going to be hosting Nicole Hudgens, and she's going to be presenting on her book, The Gender of Photography. So I hope, Ned, that you and everyone will come back and join us for that.
I remember.
So anyone else have any questions?
So it looks the same. Yeah, I have one question. Ned, did you find that the collection of photographs that are being kept by these various institutions, are they in pretty good shape? Are they very well conserved?
I think it depends. And it's kind of a reflection of what kind of budgetary support they tend to have. As someone who was a library administrator in my last years, I understand how this works.
It looks like your grandmother.
I would say in no case were they being poorly treated, but in general, all of them are in good shape for the most part. And everybody's trying to digitize their photos, especially the ones that are on glass negatives, so you don't have to handle those things, which is scary, not only from a breakage point of view, but you can cut the hell out of your hands on those things.
Thank you.
Someone wants to know what your cat's name is.
Jasper.
Jasper. Very nice.
This is his room I'm in.
Catherine says that one well-known Shaker hymn starts, "'Tis the gift to be simple, 'tis the gift to be free." And it's lovely. I've heard that in the past too.
It comes from Alfred, Maine, by the way, the Shaker colony there.
Let's see.
So I guess that's it.
So,
Dana, Reich asked, how did Ned come to discover the Shakers?
yes. How did you begin this journey?
I got interested in woodworking just before I retired. And friends of mine took me to the Fruitlands Museum at Harvard, and there was an amazing exhibit of Shaker furniture there, most of which was borrowed from other institutions. And I got hooked. I call Shaker furniture the gateway drug to Shaker studies.
Someone could build a Shaker style box camera, and then the circle would be complete. Beautifully joined. Yeah, I think this has been really wonderful. And there's another note. Kathleen says the red printing looks like Kodak opaque. It was used to spot dust specks on negatives. Yeah, any kind of masking could be used to label the negative. But yeah, I've seen the red before. Becky says, do you know if the Shakers saw photography as artistic or purely documentary?
Pretty practical bench.
I'm going to plead ignorance, but I'll give my opinion anyway. I will say that at least in the later years when Brother Delmer in Maine was taking pictures, he did a little bit of both. Some of his photographs are actually quite artistic, especially his indoor photographs, where he made more use of artificial light. Mm-hmm. If you look, there's a couple of books on the Maine Shakers, and if you can get your hands on those, or this book, The Shaker Image, you'll see a lot of photography in there.
To check up here.
Anyone else?
Ned, it's Wright. I'm struck by the question about the negative numbering. As a former professional photographer myself, and relating to the monograph journal that we just published. For the Mars, they were obsessed with numbering their negatives, and a great deal of the information in the journal is actually about documenting which photographs were taken and at what time and where and that sort of thing, which makes it easier to track down some of the details. However, there are photographers, I'm raising my hand, that kind of forgot to number things. So it was always all over the map. Doing it on glass negatives, of course, makes a lot of sense because you make it permanent. It's kind of hard to do that on a 35mm negative.
Ben has just a question. Shakers only in the United States? Are they all over the country or just New England?
They had 18 communities at one point, stretching from Maine to Indiana and Kentucky. They even had briefly communities in Georgia and Florida, but those didn't last very long. The Shakers hit their peak at about 1850. And then after the Civil War in particular, there was a steady decline till you got to about, they may have had, say, 5,000 Shakers in 1850. By 1900, that number was down to 1,000. And the largest community at that point was Canterbury, and they had 100 members, which was huge compared to some of the others.
The one in Kentucky, not far from Lexington, I believe.
There's two in Kentucky.
I can't remember the name of it.
Pleasant Hill.
Pleasant Hill. I was thinking Pleasant Home, but Pleasant Hill. I got close. But I stayed there once. Some of the old buildings you could rent and stay there. I took a trip with some relatives, and it was very pleasant. And we ate in the dining hall. And I still have a broom I bought in their broom shop. They recreated some of the products that they used to make.
I have one more question about the architecture. If the communities were mainly small, some of the buildings, like the barn, was very, very large. The barn had multiple stories. So what were on the upper stories? Usually when I think of a barn, I think of, a huge open building with a hayloft. So what were the other stories of the barn taken up by?
Well, there's actually a whole book about Shaker barns. That one, I don't know that anybody's actually been in, but I've heard my friend Robin Campbell, who's the real expert on the Harvard Shakers, told me that they used some of those upper levels in the barn to dry herbs before they had an herb drying house. And of course, they stored hay up there, and that's where most of the hay went.
Right.
You can still visit one of the multi-story barns at the Enfield, New Hampshire Museum. And you can...
The hay came in on the third floor.
On the third floor?
Yes, there was a ramp so that the horses dragged the hay wagon to the third floor. Some of it was pushed to the fourth floor. Some of it was pushed down to the third floor for storage, and the animals lived on the second floor.
Oh, wow.
So it was a very well engineered barn. And it's not functioning today, but you can still walk through it and see all the layers.
And actually the Enfield, New Hampshire Museum may very well have a CD of Shaker songs, because one of the trustees there was quite interested and had a group of singers together a few years back.
When the edict was given about photography, what about recordings of music? I mean, obviously the technology wasn't, around until later to really capture a lot of the music. But No.
I don't know the answer to that one.
Because I know as a written, sharing with a congregation and passing it down as far as, liturgical music.
The Shakers did have their own music notation.
Oh, that's, yes.
So they were able to maintain their music that way.
Ned, I've got a question.
Are the three surviving members, are they getting up there in age?
One of them is the elder sister June. I don't know exactly what her age is. I'm guessing she's in her 70s. Brother Arnold is probably in his 60s, and Brother Andrew, who's the newest member, is probably in his 30s.
Joel has posted Henry Weisenberger's obituary link in the chat also for those of you who would like to visit. It's about 8:42. So I would recommend that we all sort of send our greetings to each other and close out the evening with big thanks to Ned, and thank you, Meredith, very much.
Okay.
Great job. Thank you.
Thank you.